Welcome to Data Friday. My name is Michael Olschimke. I'm the CEO of Scalefree. We do this show here every Friday at 11 o'clock Central European Standard Time to allow you, the audience, to ask questions around data vaults 2.0, about cloud computing, about big data processing, right? If you receive multiple questions, I would cherry pick them essentially according to some team typically. And it's time box. So it's like 10, 15 minutes roughly. If there would be no questions at all, I would talk about the cluster here. I'm making some progress finally. On Tuesday, we have some employees here where I invited the DevOps to take a look at the stuff and help me out a bit. So I'm getting some noise in here. And they look forward to it as well, because they typically work in the cloud and now they get something hands-on. You can send in your questions via chat here in the client, Q&A. You can just raise your hand. You can also use the form, which I will show you afterwards. And we received a question from one of the audience here. Let me just show it to you. Let me just share my screen. 1 second. Doing this for the very first time. Where is it? There you go. Okay, so I split the question here. There were multiple questions in the form, so I split this up into 2 weeks. Keep you busy, Gregor. Keep you interested here. So it's both of them are about real-time loading, and to be honest, I could talk about a full week about real-time loading. It's a topic I've done when the book came out. The next topic I focused on was really managed services BI, and afterwards I really focused on real-time for about a year, 2 years. So did only real-time systems. All right, so they're receiving messages they're receiving CDC data via Kafka. And the first question they have is how to deal with this data, how to process the data essentially, how to store the data first of all, and then get the data into the raw data vault. Should they, let's say they receive JSON messages, JSON packages, should they keep the JSON as it is, stored in a relational database? I double check they're on Oracle. Or should they break the messages apart essentially? Now, I also double check they are using a data lake, and that's my preferred option now. The first thing I would do is I would offload all these messages, all these packages as they come in, as AVRO files, JSON files. I would offload them into a data lake. My preference here in this scenario would be to use snappy compressed AVRO files. AVRO is more efficient from a storage perspective than JSON, and snappy compress is a compression algorithms, especially for data lakes from Google, and that's more efficient. They essentially balance reading and writing from a data lake, essentially. So that's our preferred option, snappy compressed AVRO files over JSON documents. So the first job is really to get the AVRO file as it is, snappy compress it, stored in a data lake, but make sure you have timestamps attached to it. The timestamp when you received the file, essentially. That's number one. And then for the raw data vault, first of all, in the training, we talk about how we ingest CDC data. We use a standard satellite where we modify the load date by a second per row from the CDC package. Because you might receive descriptions about the same customer multiple times from inside the same CDC package. So the combination of hash key and load date is not sufficient enough to capture these these multiple rows, essentially. That's number one. So by modifying the load date, I can capture multiple rows over time, technical time, in the raw data vault in the standard satellite. That's number one. That's my target, where I want to get the data to. The way I query it out of the data lake is essentially by using, in your case, if you're on Oracle on the target, I would go for the Oracle big data, I think it's called, big data option, where you can query data from data lakes, including S3, for example. S3 data lakes and AVRO files. Not sure about snappy compress though, but if snappy doesn't work for you, then go for gunzip, essentially. That's the typical design. And if that doesn't work for you, then you just turn off compression in the worst case, right? So yeah, use big data extension from Oracle to query data out of the data lake and then directly into the raw data vault. The way it looks like, so I typically don't have any presentation slides here, but here I just copied something from this documentation here. You just create an external table essentially with the structure of the AVRO file, and essentially provide the location down. I'm skip all the stuff in between here, right? You provide the location of the document of the file, of the AVRO file, or of the collection actually, to the external table. And that's how this table here would be you would consider as your staging table in the raw level design. It's a relational staging area. And then you query it out from here into your satellite by essentially applying the concepts we teach in the class. How you load the satellite from a stage table, same concepts apply here as well. Once you have the stage table, which is based on the data lake, you essentially select the distinctors of business keys. You might have to calculate the hash key on the fly, set the load date, the record source on the fly sometimes. Depends a bit. But that's the only drawback. So because the stage table doesn't contain that. We talked about some tricks, how you could add those hash keys later on, maybe using Oracle tables in your case. On the Oracle side, you just calculate for every record here. You calculate the hash key, for example. The load date you might want to receive from the HDFS. I'm not 100% sure on how that works in Oracle Big Data, but it should be documented if you can receive the location of the file, the actual location of the file where you received the record from, as a custom field somehow. That works typically in most engines, either here in the table definition or when you query data out. And that gives you the load date, because if you encode it, if you attach the load date in the data lake to each AVRO file, either to the file itself or to some folder, then you can receive it here. That gives you the load date, and then the roll number of the record. You add that as microseconds or whatever to the load date timestamp when loading that into the satellite, essentially. That's the basic idea. Relatively straightforward. Record source, you just set something constant when you receive the data from this table, essentially. But it's the idea. It's the first answer, essentially. That's how I would do it in your scenario, with a data lake and with a relational target database like Oracle. Yeah, Oracle Big Data SQL option, that's the one I'm talking about. And is the storing in the data lake fast enough for near real-time data? Yes, because you receive these chunks of data, typically in CDC, not every millisecond or something. You receive these chunks of data from your CDC tool, whatever that is, every couple of minutes. So I remember one customer, global corporation, where they received all the changes from the source systems, hundreds of source systems worldwide. They received everything using Eternity. And Eternity was configured in a way, I'm not into these CDC tools, I just consumed that stuff, right? But in their case, they received the CDC packages every 5 minutes from the log file. So from every table, from somewhere, you could receive every 5 minutes some data. And that's how the data arrived. And that's fast enough. Just don't touch these files. That's when, as soon as you start touching these the CDC data itself, you start slowing down your ingestion. That's what I'm saying. Just dump the data into the data lake, the files as they come, as they arrive, right? Just offload everything to the data lake and then use these query engines to get the data out every couple of minutes. Whenever data arrives, in the best case, for example, in S3, you can configure an event, at least in the cloud. In the cloud, you can configure an event. Whenever S3 receives a new file, it will inform a SQS, a simple queuing service, a message queue, that a new file arrived in S3. And that should trigger your query against the external table in your staging area. That's how you receive the data out. So there shouldn't be don't wait for an hour or something to receive data from the data lake. Would work as well, but why should you wait for it, right? So you can immediately trigger the data out, at least into the raw data vault. And then it depends on your requirements from the information users, what they define as a regular snapshot date interval. So if they want to have daily reports, then you would essentially continue processing the data all the way downstream into the information marts using a daily snapshot date and insert the next snapshot on this with a schedule essentially into the pit and bridge tables. That's the basic idea. But into the raw data vault, I would push it immediately. Every couple of minutes, whenever data is ready, whenever any CDC package that's relevant for you arrives at the data lake, get informed by the file system, and then push the data into the raw data vault. There's no need to wait. If you can't do that, then you would essentially, a long time ago, couldn't do it. I mean, in the worst case, what you do is you have this external table and you would select every hour or whatever from all the external tables which are relevant for you, which you essentially keep processing into the raw data vault. You have in the, you just query for new records. The data vault patterns are incrementally loading, right? They'll check. So just query for new data from the external table into the raw data vault and identify new business keys, new relationships, new deltas. Essentially, that's the less desired option. When you query data out of the external table, filter for the records. So if you receive a message, a notification from S3 that there is a new file, you also typically, as far as I remember, get the file name. So have a where condition where you only query for the contents of this file, because otherwise your query against the external table, your full load essentially becomes larger and larger. And that's what you want to prevent, right? With the where condition, you only receive the latest batch essentially. Oh, come on, the latest batch essentially. That's the idea. All right, cool. That's the first answer. Next time we're going to discuss, what was the next question? I forgot the one, but it was also about real-time logging in the same context, essentially. I forgot the one, doesn't matter. For today, it's enough. Okay. All right, cool. Yeah, thanks for joining. Thanks for the question. Good question, actually. And next week, we'll discuss your second part, most probably if there's no other reason to skip it, essentially. Okay, cool. So see you next time. Have a nice weekend, guys. Weather's cleaning up here. It's getting nice this weekend, so we'll see. And yeah, see you next weekend, essentially. Next Friday, sorry. Okay, guys, see you guys. Thank you. Bye-bye. Thanks for joining today. If you'd like to discuss this further, give us a call on the number below here, and we're happy to discuss this with you. See you next time. Have a nice weekend. Bye-bye.